I'd like to look at what we call the law of cosines. There are three different formulas that you can use for the law of cosines, and you're going to use whichever one of these makes the most sense for the problem that you have. What I'm going to encourage you to do is I'm going to say memorize the pattern, not necessarily the specific formula. Okay, the way this works, I'll show you on the first one and then explain a little bit on the second one. But you're going to always start with one side. So let's say on the first formula, I've started with c squared. On the other side of the equal sign, you're going to next have the other two sides squared. So we already have c squared on one side. Across the equals, we're going to have a squared plus b squared added together. Okay. Also in the formula, the next term is always minus 2 times the product of those two sides that are squared on the right-hand side. And then continuing on, the negative 2ab is going to be multiplied by the cosine of the angle that goes with the side that you started with. Okay, and I'll re-explain on the second one just to re-emphasize. We start with one of our sides and we square it. The next two letters on the other side of the equal signs are the other two sides of the triangle. You're always going to have minus 2, and then you're going to have the product of those letters that are on that same side, and then you're going to have cosine of the angle that corresponds with the side you started with. Okay, and you can see the last one is the same way. Okay, the reason I said choose which one of these three that you want to use for the problem you're working on, you see that each of these three start with a different side first. And so one may just be more convenient than another. Let's look at some examples. Okay, this problem says solve the triangle where side B is 5. That should be side C. Make sure that's a small c so that we understand. Is 8, and then capital A is 35 degrees. On here, the first thing you need to realize is this is not a side-side angle kind of problem. Side-side angle means you have two sides, which we do have here, but the angle that you're given is corresponds to one of the sides. And you see that's not true. In other words, you're given two sides, B and C, but you're not given the angle that corresponds with either B or C. You're given angle A. That being the case, we need to use the law of cosines. Okay, on this particular problem, solve the triangle still means find the missing sides. Y'all see that the first side that we're missing is side A. So let's start by using a formula that starts with side A. So for the law of cosines, we can start by using a squared. On the other side of the equal, we'll want to do b squared plus c squared, and then minus 2, the product of the product of b and c, the same letters that are on that side, and then times the cosine of the angle that's opposite the side we started with. We started with side A, so it's going to be cosine of A. Okay, from here, we can plug in what we know. We do not know what A is. That's what we're trying to find. We know side B, so that would be 5 squared, plus we know side C is 8, so that's 8 squared, and then minus 2 times 5 times 8 times the cosine of A, which is 35 degrees. Okay, now on these particular problems, you can plug the right-hand side of this equation into your calculator, and you can kind of let your calculator do everything for you. Do make sure that you're in degree mode. We see that the cosine is of 35 degrees, so we want to make sure we're in degree mode. Okay, the only thing you have to be careful of is actually here what you're doing is you're solving for a squared. Well, what we'd like to do is we'd like to solve for just a. And so we can take the square root of the right-hand side, and once we take the square root of that side, then that would be this equation solved for a. Now you remember from algebra that normally when you take the square root of both sides, you have to put a plus and a minus sign in front of the square root. Well, we don't have to do this here because a represents the side of a triangle, and what you're doing is you're solving for the side of a triangle, which you know is always going to be positive. So I'll put a little positive here in the front indicating I understand that I'm choosing the positive answer. Now do be careful when you're plugging this in your calculator. When you open a square root, it will require you to type in or it will actually type the first parenthesis in for you, but when you get finished, make sure you close off whatever's under the root with one extra parenthesis. Okay, if we type this in our calculator, we're going to get A equals, this value is 4.84436130. And so that's our missing side A. Okay, now we're missing a couple of angles. We're missing angle B and we're missing angle C. Now here's what I'm going to tell you, and this is going to be true from here on out. If you have a choice, use the law of cosines. When you use the law of cosines and you're solving for an angle, you are always guaranteed that whatever angle you're solving for, there's only going to be one choice or one answer for the angle. We know that sometimes when we use the law of sines, then we either have something that's not a triangle, sometimes we have two triangles, sometimes we have one triangle. In other words, the law of sine does not necessarily give us one single answer for an angle if we're not careful. And so if you can, from here on out, when you're trying to solve for an angle, if you don't have a side-side angle, a side-side angle kind of triangle, try to use the law of cosines if you can. It's a safer formula. Okay, so let's go and pick the next thing we'd like to find. Let's say we'd like to find angle B. If we want to try to find angle B is the only thing that we would not know in our formula. Okay, that being the case, we actually want to start with side B. And so this is the formula that we'd want to use. B squared equals A squared plus C squared minus 2AC times cosine of angle B. We want to use that formula because cosine of angle B needs to be in the formula, and that's the thing that we don't know. Okay, we'll go ahead and plug in what we know. We know what B is, so this is going to be 5 squared equals. We know what A is. We can use that from what we have up above. Make sure you use all the decimal points because we don't want to round. The rounding would throw our answer off here. We know what side C was. That was given to us originally. Side C was 8. And I'll try to squeeze all of this in. I'm going to abbreviate. I'm not going to round my decimal here. I'm just going to abbreviate it for just copying down purposes. Okay, and the last thing we have is the cosine of B. We don't know what that is. Now, be careful when you're trying to solve this particular formula for cosine of B. Okay, a couple of things to point out. This term right here and this term right there, both of those can be subtracted to the other side because they're being added to this side. This term right, or these, I'm going to say factors right here, cannot be added or subtracted to the other side because they're actually multiplied by this cosine. And so here in a little while, to get rid of those particular numbers, we're going to actually have to divide both sides by what I have underlined in red. Okay, I'm going to rearrange a little bit, and I'm not even going to worry about rewriting things. In other words, I know 5 squared is 25, and I know that 8 squared is 64, but I'm going to let my calculator do all the calculations for me, so I'm not going to simplify out any of these numbers. Okay, I'm going to subtract, first of all, what I have underlined in blue to the left-hand side. Okay. So I have 5 squared minus 4.84 and so forth squared minus 8 squared equals negative 2 times 4.84 and so forth times 8 times cosine of B. Okay, from this point I'm going to divide both sides by what's in front of the cosine. So negative 2 times 4.84 and so forth times 8. I'm going to divide this whole side by the same number. Okay, and then in that way I'll be able to have cosine entirely by itself. In other words, this cancels out with that. I end up with cosine of b on this side, and then everything else would represent the value of cosine of b. Okay, I'll go ahead and I'll put my full decimal back in here. I just lost it for a little bit so that I wouldn't have to write it down every time. Okay, but now that it's actually time to type all this in the calculator, I'll go ahead and put that decimal back in. Okay, and when you're entering the left-hand side into your calculator, you're going to need an extra set of parentheses, one extra set in the top saying that this is your numerator, and then one extra set in the denominator saying that this is my denominator. Okay? Now, what you're actually going to perform on your calculator, you see that this particular value is going to end up being the value of cosine. What we actually want to do is we want to find the value of b, the angle. And so at this point, what you're actually going to type in your calculator is an inverse. In other words, angle b is going to be the inverse cosine of everything I have written here. And I'll put it how you'd have to enter it in your calculator. Okay, when you enter in cosine inverse, it's going to automatically open up a set of parentheses. You're going to have to open up a set of parentheses saying, here's my numerator. Okay, you can actually take the parentheses off of the 5. Okay, you can just do 5 squared minus, and then you can do the same thing here, 4.844361305 squared, and then minus 8 squared. Okay, you do need a parenthesis there to say close off the numerator, and then do divide, open in parentheses, -2 multiplied by 4.844361305 multiplied by 8, and then close off that parenthesis, and you'll have to use one more to close off your inverse. Alright, so b equals, and here the value you get for b is 36.2993608.3 degrees. Okay, now that leaves me with only one thing I don't know, and that's the value of angle C. Angle C, I don't mind because we're having to use rounded numbers anyway. I don't mind if you find that by just doing 180 degrees minus the 35 degrees you were given minus the degree measure that we just found for angle B. And if you do that, then you will get a measure of 108.7006392 degrees. This completes this example of using the law of cosines.